Apologies, Michaela Boyle, our apologies. My members are obliged to declare relevant financial or interest each committee meeting as applicable. Draft minutes, pages 6 to 10. Members content their accurate record. Agreed. Matters arising. Can remind members that at this meeting last week, the committee was briefed by an official from the department on rating issues. During the briefing session, members discussed a number of derelict buildings within towns and cities, including the demise of premises such as Carryduff Shopping Centre. Can advise members after the meeting article from the Telegraph was sent to the committee by Marcin and can be found at pages 12 to 15 of the main pack. Can I also refer members to the acknowledgement from the former Deputy Chair Dominic Bradley regarding the committee's letter of thanks, and that's at page 4 of your tabled papers. Table of requests then, pages 16 to 20, that's for noting. Members content to note. Moving on to the briefing then. Can refer members to pages 22 to 34 of your main pack. Departmental briefing papers at page 11 of your tabled papers, and preparation sheet at page 6 of your tabled papers.
Can I give some background to that email and that piece in the Belfast Telegraph?
Sorry?
Can I give some background to the piece, the correspondence piece on the about Carryduff Shopping Centre? Did you go through that there now? Did we mention the correspondence?
Do you want to refer to it now?
Yeah. I want to explain to people why it's there.
Go ahead, yeah.
I mean, why I asked, I sent it on during the meeting last week, is that's part of the holdings of Kilmona, which is Paddy Kearney, who gave evidence here. And I remember one of the things he said, those who were members at the time remember that he said about how he was engaged in a number of developments which would help regenerate and stimulate the economy and stimulate communities, and while that may be true in certain areas, it seems to me that Carryduff, which is my constituency, is going backwards. This is one of the worst examples of a site that's been landlocked and log jammed for almost 10 years now, and I'm very disappointed to see that instead of getting the regeneration we're being promised, that now the roof is being removed. And I think it'd be very helpful if we asked Kilmona what is happening with it. I think it was one of the sites was mentioned when he was in here, but certainly I'm not content that the only shopping centre in Carryduff that had been promised now 3 times by Paddy Kearney, 3 different times been promised regeneration, and now it's going backwards. So I would help the chair if that's possible.
Okay, members content. I should have said as well in terms of apologies, Claire Hannah is running a bit late. She's got a flat tyre, so she should be with us within the hour. Moving on to the briefing session then. Morning.
Morning. Yes.
Grace, if it's okay, we go straight into questions. It's just we've got a bit of a packed agenda
Okay.
today. Just, I mean, in terms of the briefing papers from the department, during last week's briefing from Corporate Services, the committee was informed that all briefing papers for committee meetings should be with the committee 1 week before the meeting. And the briefing paper for this session was received at 3:23 p.m. on Monday of this week. This is an issue we've raised before with different officials in terms of the lateness of papers, and it means that members are less prepared for meetings. So is there any particular reason why the target submission date wasn't met on this occasion?
I've no comment to make on that.
It's a very political answer. Were you aware of the process of those papers being submitted, or is that something you could look at for us and give us an explanation in writing?
I was aware of the process, and I was also aware of when the papers were issued to the committee.
But,
Communication problem.
yeah.
Pardon?
A communication problem. No communication.
Yes.
But you know, it is a problem because this is a committee of the Assembly and a committee representing the public, so we do need those papers in better time in the future. Okay. And the cover letter to the briefing paper, it says that the People Strategy targets to materially improve various employee engagement measures over the course of the 3-year strategy have to a large extent been rendered unachievable and this is the result of cost-cutting exercises, including the voluntary exit scheme, continued pay restraint, and departmental restructuring, which is obviously ongoing. What further explanation can be provided as to the employee engagement measures which are unachievable and the specific reasons for that?
Well, the employee engagement measures were one of the measures that were set out when we developed the strategy, and I think it does have to be seen in context, as explained in the paper to the committee chair and members, that the strategy was developed and launched in 2013, which seems like a long, long time away now, and that the whole context has changed. And much as we tried to anticipate when we were developing the strategy and to future-proof it, a number of events overtaken the commitments that were set out in the strategy, most notably, as this committee will be well aware, in the Department of Finance and Personnel, the changes in terms of reducing the size of the civil service and the subsequent change and upheaval that has brought about. We were keen when we were developing the strategy to put in tangible measures, and we did struggle with that, to actually see how could you actually measure cause and effect, to actually measure the outcomes in a very evidence-based way. And one of the ones that we came up with and was agreed by departments was it would actually look at the employee engagement, which is measured on a regular basis by the staff satisfaction survey. The results of that survey aren't out yet, they're not available yet. But I think it would be unreasonable to think that we were going to get the 10% improvement that we thought, just because of the level of change that there has been. But there has been some work, and we haven't achieved everything. But I think, as I did set out in the paper, and the annex to the committee as well provides details, there have been things which have been done. So it's not a totally big picture. Some things have been achieved and some progress has been achieved. Would I have liked more? Would departments have liked more? I think the answer to that is yes.
You're saying that the results of the survey are not out yet.
Yeah.
Do you have any indications in terms of what the outcomes might be in terms of overall staff morale and issues needing to be addressed? Because obviously that is a big issue for the committee in terms of the effect of the VES.
I think just my own sense is it won't have gone up. I mean, we were looking for an increase in staff engagement, and our levels of staff engagement or employee engagement are already lower, for example, than what they are in Great Britain. So my sense is, pardon me, is that we won't have seen the increase that we had anticipated. But I'm sure that will the committee will receive a briefing on that, and that will become a public document. I don't have an exact time scale on that. I did check. It's not something that I'm specifically responsible for. It's not within my remit.
Given that the People Plan 15-16 is covering the final year of the People Strategy 2013 to 16, what, if any, other commitments or targets in the strategy may not be achieved, which are not outlined in the 15-16 plan?
I'd need just to refer to the update that was given to the committee. There was a little annex with the papers, and I appreciate maybe members haven't had time to go through it. But in the annex to the paper, if I could just refer to that, Chair, it is set out there. There's a little what's called a RAG status, and if you can see it in colour on your screen, or you've printed it in colour, you'll be able to see at a glance whether the wording's also there, which ones are amber and which ones are green. So it is set out there in detail which ones we think are in some doubt that will not be achieved this year. There's just quite a lot of detail there if you want me to talk through it. I'm conscious you said you were...
Yeah. Even if you could just summarise the main issues.
I think the summary is as set out in that annex, so just if members want to refer to that. The first one, which is amber, is about engaging with heads of professions to identify plans and leadership priorities. And there has been some work done looking at NICS career development proposals, and further engagement is planned to take that forward. So that's still a work in progress. Some things have been achieved, but other work is required there. The ones that are green I'll not comment on.
I suppose an issue, I mean, we did a report on the flexible working. Could you outline perhaps what was achieved against the commitment to explore ways in which the use of technology can support an agile, flexible and mobile workforce, especially in light of our committee's recommendations, because obviously given the changes within the civil service at the moment, flexible working in our view certainly would be an opportunity to realise some savings. And
Yes, yes. I'm just looking, just trying to find the right number. In terms of enabling technology, it has indeed, steps have been taken to make better use of that to improve service delivery. And I can just give some examples. There have been a range of e-learning packages available through the Centre for Applied Learning in the Civil Service to provide staff with training at their desks and facility for departments to roll out specific training to all staff in a particular time frame, and the types of training that has been used to be deployed by that particular medium are things such as diversity training, display screen equipment, health and safety, and indeed managing attendance as well, and managing staff absence. So that's been one way that we've used technology. There's been other ways, including instant messaging, increased use and availability of video conferencing, which obviously saves some cost on travelling time. Social media, we've looked at the policy on social media and it's been updated to make it fully available for use by all departments to keep their policies in place. There's been other technologies which I must confess I'm not terribly personally au fait with, including Jabber and other ways of remote working, which have been put in place as well, which have helped staff to be able to reduce travel, or who may have been able to work at different locations. And looking ahead, if I could just continue, Chair, there's a questionnaire which is due to be issued, which will actually seek staff views on how technology would help them work in a more agile and effective way. And the intention, I understand, is that that questionnaire will issue this financial year to look at ways that technology specific help staff. So some measures have been put in place.
but has there been a cultural change yet within the department? I suppose the one thing that sticks out in my mind was, I think it was Stephen Pulver was before the committee, and it seemed to indicate that things weren't moving in the right direction from the top level, which is obviously key to ensuring that there's a quicker change in terms of flexible working. So has that moved apace since then?
Yeah. I guess, and it's not my specific area, but from my experience, I guess it depends what you mean by flexible working. In terms of people working alternative working patterns, in terms of people working partial retirement, which obviously I would know about from pensions, significant numbers of people in the civil service do already avail of those opportunities, and we are seen to be an exemplary employer in terms of the range of options that we offer staff.
That's more flexi time as opposed to flexi location.
Well, that's described as, that's what I just was wanting to clarify. That's a part of, that's people working flexible. Yeah. If you're thinking about people working in different locations, are you thinking specifically about people working at home, for example?
Working at home, but also suppose those travelling from Derry or the west to Belfast having satellite locations to work from as opposed to the commute day.
I'm not in position to give the committee any further detail on that. I don't have any further information on that particular issue.
We get a wee update just in the flexible working stuff, just in writing, just so we can.
Yes, I can take it won't be me, but I can take a note and I can pass that on.
Yeah,
happy to do so.
Liza?
Sure. The annual people plan, maybe Grace, we'll have a look at that. Under effective leadership, there's a commitment to engage with heads of profession to identify forward plans and leadership priorities. That has a number status. I'm just wondering, Grace, on that, what further details are available in this commitment, and why is it not on track?
I just need to check my notes again. Give me a second.
I guess this is a fairly high level one.
It is high level, and as I say, some work has been done on it. I think the easiest thing is I can take an action and provide you with further information on that.
Maybe throw in, if you don't know the answer, is there any chance of this being agreed by the end of March? 2016?
I think what will be helpful to do is I'll set out the specifics of what has been achieved that I referred to in the earlier question from the Chair. So I'll set out more detail on what has been achieved and what the intentions are. I know that there has been intensive engagement with the various heads of profession, and again they've had to look at what the implications are of the voluntary exit scheme for their particular professional disciplines as well. So I think if the committee would like more detail, I think the best thing is that I take an action and I'll provide you some more detail in writing on that, if that would be acceptable.
Thanks, Grace. If we turn then to the high performance talent development theme. This obviously has been affected. I don't know how much sort of forward planning was done on it, but certainly has been impacted by the voluntary exit scheme, downsizing.
Yes.
These have an amber status at the moment.
Yes.
Just wondering, should these not have a red status given the lack of progress?
I think the view is that some progress has been made. So I think if it was red, if it was red, we'd be saying there'd be no progress that has been made. But I think the fact that we have made some progress is why
Is it not red? Sort of, you're not going to make target.
Well, you're
Amber, hoping to.
Yeah.
Important that get that wee bit right too.
Yeah. I think we had. I'm not sure that's been provided to the committee.
At the front. There's a wee key at the front.
table, which sets out why the definitions are applied. The rationale from it, if you look at the first page, and our view is that it's amber because some progress has been made, but the rate is less than anticipated. There may be significant doubt about the achievement of outcomes within the targeted time frame. So on the basis of that definition, that's why the rating of amber has been
I
applied.
think you've changed. That's not the general acceptance of the applied code. That's your interpretation. I guess we've got to live with it. Amber means a warning.
Pardon?
Amber means a warning. We're not going to make target. You're saying if some progress is made, it's amber. It's a bit optimistic.
I think.
Didn't
Without sounding like an oxymoron, I think actually it can be both. You can have made some progress but not make the target, and that's actually what the definition says. But I do actually think it can be both.
But do you not think that having lost people through the voluntary exit scheme, there's now an even greater need to focus on talent management and keeping what you actually have, like across the Northern Ireland Civil Service?
I think there is a need to focus on talent management and career development of our people, because we spend a lot of money on them employing them. There's a significant pay bill associated with it. And in terms of delivering public services, we'll do it through our people. So I think that need has not gone away. Indeed, it may have heightened. So yes, there is still that need. But again, I think it needs to be kept in perspective. Yes, we have lost a lot of people with experience from the voluntary exit scheme. But if I recall, we did some work, and I think it was presented to this committee some time ago, that the experience level of those people who remain on average is around 18 years. So we still have people who have good experience who we will want to develop. So, I mean, yes, I agree. It's something we want to look at and something we want to put in place in a measured way, and also in the light of whatever the financial constraints are as well.
That's always a caveat, isn't it?
It certainly is in Department of Finance and Personnel.
This is it. The last point, Grace, given the situation about the establishing the talent management strategy for the new departments, obviously there's some urgency in that now. We're looking sort of into the price of it. What sort of time frame do you see for that?
Again, I don't have detail. Maybe I should have explained, I think as I did in the paper, that my role and Debbie's role is to coordinate this, so I'm not involved personally in these various work streams, but what I will undertake is to get you more information on that and just a bit more detail about what has been achieved and what the plans are for the coming year.
And if you could tell us who are responsible for these particular work streams, it would be helpful, I think, as well.
Yes, I'll do that. I think on most of them it does set out in the little annex at the back, it does set out what's called the SRO, the Senior Responsible Owner, so there are names there, but in given the written response to the committee, I'll indicate that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. Just taking to page 6 of the report. It's page 19 of the members' table pack. The new pay and grading system for industrial staff. There's some dates there mentioned to early February, end of February. Can you give us an update on that, please?
Again, I'll have to give you further written update on that. I don't think we actually have anything because the ballot is for the end of February, so trying to remember if I got the month right. We're not actually at the end of February yet, so I have no further update to give than what is there, but it's a matter that the committee would be updated on.
But the proposals have been taken to the staff?
Yes, yes, but the outcome of the ballot won't be known until the end of February, so there's nothing more I can say.
You're not really in a position then to...
No.
Okay. Moving on then to page 7, we have a couple more amber statuses there. What departments have yet to complete their audits in terms of the NICS-wide plan to address skill gaps?
Realise I'm sounding like a broken record. Again, I don't have
Give
that
any
level of
information.
detail, but I will provide it to the
Find
committee.
that out. Okay. And perhaps you could find out a little bit more information then on that in terms of how the results of those audits will be validated in light of the staff departures under the VES, and what the new target date for DFP is to implement the action plans, and where Yep, go ahead.
My apologies for interrupting, but if a department is doing a skills audit, it won't be for DFP necessarily. In fact, it won't be for DFP to implement what's arising from the skills audit, if that's targeted by departments or if it's something that's been looked at by heads of profession. It won't necessarily fall to Department of Finance and Personnel, just to clarify.
Right, okay, that's fine. Just then finally, and again, perhaps I'm going to be told that you don't know anything specifically about this, but you can maybe take information back. There are some issues here in terms of sickness and absence levels. I see we have a green status here on each of the issues in terms of that on page 9 of the pack. Not wanting to bring up this issue again of amber or green or what falls into what category. I know it's not defined in legislation. This is more your plan, but surely you would you concede that there still needs to be an awful lot more work done in relation to this?
I think I can just make a comment on the amber and the green. Not a political comment, but in terms of the amber and green rating, I think it relates to the commitment. I think we have to look at what was it we were setting out to achieve, and the commitments that are set out on page 9, those are green because those have been achieved, and most of those are actually our specific figures to show why they have been achieved. If you're referring to generally about the levels of sick absence in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, I understand there's an evidence session tabled, I think, coming up anyway, I'm not quite sure of the date, with one of my colleagues from Corporate HR, Mark Bailey, on that specific issue, and I'm sure he will pick up on those wider points then. But just to clarify,
Yeah,
those
no, it's
items
against
are
your
green
choice. No, I understand
because
that.
it's
I
against
know you're
those
not saying
commitments.
that everything's been sorted now. I understand that.
Yeah.
Given the high proportion of sick absence due to stress and anxiety issues, what detail can be provided in relation to the stress policy and high-level targets, including how performance against these targets will be monitored?
Again, I think that's more appropriate for my colleague Mark Bailey, and he is scheduled, I understand, to attend an evidence session, and I think he'll pick up on the detail of those points there. I'm just referring to these ones. So.
Okay, no, that's fine. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, just looking at page 17 and the NICS fast stream scheme, which has a green status. What's the purpose of reviewing that? And do you think the scheme will continue given the recruitment freeze currently?
Sorry, I'm just.
It's on page 17, I think.
Just have a different number.
Yeah. It's 4 in your, four of the. More of the report, if you just look down the...
Yes.
Yep.
So you're asking really two questions. What was the purpose of the review and will the scheme continue?
Exactly.
Yes. I think the purpose of the review, it's standard. It's just to take stock to see how effective has it been to bring people in through that particular route. And again, I'm sure the committee will be updated on that detail. Whether the scheme continues or not is really a matter for departments to determine if they see that there's a need, and I'm sure that decision will be informed by the review of the scheme. So it's very much, do they see that there are benefits from using that particular route to introduce people into the Northern Ireland Civil Service or not. So I think that decision will be informed by the outcome of the review of the scheme.
Okay, well, in terms of, just on the following page of the report there, in terms of the commitments under the high performance management theme, the ones that are amber status,
Yes.
what are the reasons for the shortfall in the department's compliance with commitments on completing performance management reports?
I have not been given reasons by departments as to why they have not complied. It's the responsibility of each department to do that. Targets have been agreed and have been set across the Northern Ireland Civil Service and departments. Some departments have done extremely well and others haven't, but I have not been given reasons. I know in DFP, maybe if I could just follow on to explain, and I think DFP has shown that given attention by senior management and enthusiasm and commitment by senior management, it's kind of a bit like the spotlight idea, not the programme, that's helpful and that encourages people to do it. And I know certainly within my own directorate, within corporate HR, and indeed within my own division and pensions division, it's seen as this is part of your job, so it's taken very seriously and it's given emphasis and attention. So I can't comment what other departments have or not done. I can comment on what DFP has done and what in my particular business area has been done has worked well. So there may be lessons for there which we will share and are sharing with other departments to encourage them to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate that you wouldn't have them. Well, presumably there is a mechanism if those targets aren't met for the reasons for them not being met to be captured somewhere for action even within the departments. Okay. Well, you touched on it there, but what has been the respective performance of each of the departments, the sort of headline?
Well, I think it's
that.
there is a range, and again, I can give that level of detail to the committee in this very long letter you'll be getting.
Yeah, just
so I can give that level of detail in it. But I think that the important thing is to note that it is possible to achieve high levels of compliance with those particular policies, because I would contend that if one department can do it, then another department can do it, and that's where I think it has to be positive engagement, that it's something that's important, that it's part of your job as a line manager, whatever various pressures your business area are facing, because it's really important, as I said at the start of this session, how we will actually deliver good and effective public services is through really good engagement with our staff. So it is quite critical and quite important. I just think we need to keep reinforcing that message and encouraging.
Okay. Just the target dates of October and November 2015 weren't met, but the performance is still amber, I think, rather than red. Why would that not be red if the targets have slipped?
I'm going to sound like a broken record number 2, because it goes back to our definition of amber as set out.
Okay.
Because some progress has been made, so the full target will not be met, but have we achieved it in some areas? Well, yes. That's why it's the rating of amber. And it's not green because it hasn't been met in its entirety.
Okay.
Jury's out on that one. Still.
That's an amber gambler, I think, is a technical definition for that. Well, again, you probably have touched on it, but what action have DFP or others taken to sort of drive improvement in the future in compliance by departments?
I think it will be. I mean, it is something that's reported and looked at Permanent Secretaries Group, so in a spotlight in that sense is being shone on it. It has got more attention within the last 12, 18 months, so I think things have been improving, to be positive about that. In some departments, perhaps there was quite a low baseline to improve from. So it is reported on, it is looked at very senior levels right across the service, and certainly those departments that are able to comply will be and are sharing the lessons about how they've actually managed to achieve that.
Okay. No more from me, Chair.
Grace, okay, there's a few things to come back to us with in writing.
Yes.
When can we get that for?
He's not in a position to answer that question.
Finishes with start.
You just want to talk together, you two. I'm not going to give a date, because that information is not information that I hold. Because if it had been within my remit, I would have been able to give it to the committee today. So I am going to have to go out and commission that work from other senior
We can get an initial
responsible.
response in the next couple of weeks.
Next few weeks, yes.
Next couple of weeks. Okay, all right. All right, thank you both very much.
Okay.
Grace.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, members, moving on to the next briefing. I refer you to pages 36 to 79 of the main pack and the preparation sheet at page 38 of your tabled papers. Good morning.
Hi, members.
Stay away from it, can you?
Sure.
Well, we have a heavy agenda today, so if it's okay, we'll just go straight to questions
Absolutely.
on the review. Just to start then, in terms of convergence, and this is page 39 of members' main packs, in terms of the department's commitment to keep convergence under consideration, how and when does the department plan to analyse and monitor changes in convergence?
Well, in terms of the public expenditure allocation that we receive, is something that we're always mindful of, and something that we're always keeping under review. The report, and I suppose I would like to say that it was a very thorough and well thought out report, which took on board quite a lot of expert kind of academic and constitutional expertise and input. So convergence is a long-term feature. The findings of the report are something that we wouldn't dispute. We're mindful of the impact that it has. However, as presented in the report, at times when public expenditure either is decreasing or flat, or when inflation is low, or when the population increasing in Northern Ireland is increasing at a rate lower than UK average, actually the Barnett formula works in our favour. So in the current constrained public expenditure environment, we're largely shielded from the impact of convergence. So it's something that we will continue to monitor. Less of a pressing issue at this point in time, given the spending review outcome that we've had. So it'll be something we keep under review rather than perhaps say, oh, we're going to do a big report in the next month or two and see what the impact is. I think the committee's report has been very useful in kind of shining a light on this yet again, but it is something that we're mindful of.
How do you monitor it at the moment then? You don't see it as a present issue at the moment, so there's no...
Well, in terms of convergence, I'm not saying obviously the public, we're always focused on ensuring that we have a sufficient allocation and we get the best outcome for Northern Ireland. We don't envisage, given the spending review outcome that we've had in recent months, that we're going to see convergence particularly move in any great direction. So that's something that we've been able to take on board in terms of the spending review outcome.
I think a key publication from our perspective in relation to this is the annual public expenditure statistical analysis, which much of the information in the report is based upon, and we will continue to monitor that in the years ahead to see how our public expenditure compares against the rest of the UK.
Rather than calling for a switch to a needs-based assessment, the committee's recommendation on developing a local case on need was about a pre-emptive measure in the event that either the Westminster Government decides to dispense with or alter the Barnett formula, or that the formula no longer meets our spending needs in future. And also the previous Minister's response emphasised that our higher level of public expenditure per head is totally justified given the level of need locally. So what scope is there to underpin this position by DFP establishing an up-to-date evidence-based case on our local needs in order to defend the Executive's future funding position?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of points, Chair. Well, one, the government has signalled that there's no intention of moving away from Barnett in the near future, that it's committed to Barnett. In terms of a needs assessment, there was a significant body of work done around 2000, 2001, trying to come up with a needs-based assessment. I suppose the key factor in being able to undertake a needs assessment is having the data and the information there. In Northern Ireland, we do have a wealth of statistical information on socioeconomic and the full range of factors that you would need to make a needs assessment. there's a methodology largely there in place. The challenge in a needs assessment perhaps wouldn't be as much doing it and constructing it, but it would be a bilateral engagement with the government in terms of agreeing how you would actually measure it. So it's difficult to do something preemptively to say, right, here's our assessment of need. That's a piece of work that was done, and I know Professor Hotham, he has kind of provided some evidence to the committee on this to kind of set out what Northern Ireland's need is, and it largely tallied with the work that was done in 2000-2001, suggesting that our need relative to the English kind of spending is in the round of kind of 20 to 25% higher than English average spend. So we have that wealth of information there. If there was ever any indication that the government was going to move away from Barnett, then that's something that we could look to open an engagement with them on that. But we have that information largely. It's something that we would look at as and when the need arose.
Okay. Leslie?
Yeah, just on the transparency of Barnett, particularly on calculation of the Barnett consequentials. I noticed the previous minister stated Treasury's provided the department with high-level figure work, which has been sufficient for officials to ensure that the Barnett formula is being applied consistently and correctly. What level of detail is provided in this data?
We receive high-level detail of allocations to English departments through the spending review process, and then application of population percentages and comparability factors to derive the outcome for Northern Ireland.
What are the comparability factors?
They are detailed within the Statement of Funding Policy, and they assess how spend under the devolved administration compares to expenditure in English departments.
Right.
And obviously we receive that information at the spending review, and we're in a position to then assess that the Barnett formula has been applied consistent with how it should have been in line with the Statement of Funding Policy.
Nothing to hide there. So can that be published, that information?
We would probably need to consult with the Minister and Treasury to see that they're content that information is released into the
Not
public
even
domain.
if it's very sensitive, even available to the committee here, because we'd like to get into that detail and just
We can certainly look at that.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Martin?
Thanks, gentlemen. Sorry to miss the very start. I was in the library studying. I just doing my excuses.
He's reading the paper, that's what he means.
That was my excuses. Good. Tell us a little bit more about how the Scottish are getting on. I see Mr. Swinney has said he doesn't want to negotiate Barnett, but we're also aware that as they talk about moving forward and income tax and so on, that they want it to have no detriment in particular to their own voters in Scotland. It seems to me here that we have a very trusting attitude to the Treasury in terms of the fiscal settlement and in terms of Barnett, that they have all the cards to play. And we're sending our 18 guys, so when we send you over there, we know you'll get a good conclusion to negotiations, but it does seem to me that we're not as assertive as the Scots. I mean, in the report here it says, look, the British or London decides what how the devolved regions will be funded. It's their call, nothing we can do about it. And then goes on to say, well, actually, basically, when we do get into a Barney with them, a negotiation will do well. The Scottish seem to be a little less trusting. Am I wrong in that, or do you have a more collegial relationship with Treasury than the Scots do?
I suppose it's important to unpick. There's kind of two elements to this, Martin. I suppose the first one, if you take the devolution piece out of it in terms of taxes, and a lot of the recent noise that we're getting around this is in the negotiations are going on around how the block or the Scottish Block Grant is going to be adjusted. If you take that out of it for a second, and we're looking at how the settlement the Barnett delivers for Scotland and for Northern Ireland, it's not an issue of, I wouldn't comment on the relationship. What I would say is that, the Minister pointed to this in her response, that Barnett delivers what we see as a fully justified allocation, which is, I think, 21 or 23% higher than the UK average, or 26% higher than the English average. So it delivers the highest level of spend in the UK for Northern Ireland. So I suppose the question would be, when you're seeking to challenge Treasury, and whether you'd be seeking to unpick Barnett, do you think that would be advantageous and would it deliver a better outcome? So that's the first point we make about whether we would seek to engage with, in the past, on Barnett. The second piece is around what Scotland are doing around devolution of taxes, and what they're trying to ensure is that the block grant adjustment mechanism that's applied to Scotland is as favourable and as fair for Scotland as it can be. So they are ahead of us in that process. Certainly when we are doing that with them on corporation tax, for example, we will seek to be equally as robust and challenge them on to ensure that we get a mechanism that is as fair for Northern Ireland. And, you know, as you'll have picked up in terms of the press coverage around the discussions, they're looking at different methods of adjusting the block going forward. And there are pros and cons of those, and the Scots, you know, are reportedly in favour of particular types of mechanisms, and the Treasury are advocating alternatives. And that's where the discussion is going. And when we are in that place in terms of corporation tax, we'd be equally as robust to ensure that we get a mechanism that doesn't disadvantage Northern Ireland.
So just two quick things then. The Scots wanted an independent commission to look at this. Are they just, is anybody listening to that request, or is there any progress in this call by the Scots for an independent commission to look at the whole funding settlements and formula?
It's not something that I'm positioned to comment on. Obviously, they have their own independent fiscal council in Scotland, and the Scots see a role for that. And obviously, that's something that they will need to discuss with Treasury in terms of the role of that body and the role of the OBR, for example.
Then just to move on and trying to learn from what the Scots are doing in terms of income tax. In terms of corporation tax, you use the figure here in your response of 325 million, a possible hit, as it were, to the block grant if we were to devolve to corporation tax from 2018 on. That figure seems a wee bit out of date.
It is.
Okay, so we're
the more up-to-date figure is now 275 million in the third year of ramp-up from introductions of 2021.
And that's set against what, an 18% corporation tax in Britain? Or certainly in England anyway at that stage?
Yes, but however, the way corporation tax returns are made, the full effect of that reduction in the UK rate isn't felt in that year, where it's the 2020 or where it's 275, because many companies pay their corporation tax. Their payments are lagged, so we won't see the full benefit of that 18% cut until the year after. But the full year ramp up is 275.
So. And you're standing over that figure? That still seems to be too high. Is that the figure you're working on like today, or is that the figure that? Figure here's 325. Just say 50 million there in 2 minutes. But you're still, your best calculation still is it will cost the block grant 275.
That's the estimates that we've been provided by Treasury, and they've updated it to reflect both the movements to 19 and 18% in the UK rate, and then the updated UK forecast for CT receipts. There's a number of assumptions that underpin that, and there are assumptions that we're seeking to discuss and debate with Treasury. We would have some questions around the basis of those figures. So it's the latest figure that we've got from Treasury. My thing is that's the final bill. It could well change. We'll be seeking to challenge them on that.
Just to finish, I think they're wrong. I think the assumptions are too much favouring the Treasury than favour us. I mean, I think it'll be considerably less, 275 million. I suppose, Chair, the point is that we're coming to this D-Day quicker and quicker. When we started talking about it, it was late 2014, 2015's gone. So that's certainly an area where we'd like the pencil sharpened and a really robust case made. I think 2.7. I think they're chancing their arm.
And I suppose another point I would make is that is the net block. That's the net cost to the block grant. That reflects both the direct cost of immediately cutting the tax rate for all the companies that are currently here, and the behavioural impacts that there may be from companies seeking to relocate from GB to Northern Ireland. There is a 4-year review mechanism that has been established as part of the Fresh Start Agreement, and one of the key elements of the costs that we would be looking at are the behavioural costs, because there are more assumptions need to be made around in advance about what firms' behaviours are likely to be. So that's a particular aspect of the cost that we'd be seeking to challenge.
Thank you, Chair.
Gordon. Thanks. Chair, just to stay on with corporation tax, we obviously want to get us the best deal that we can with the Treasury, and there have obviously been figures that have been thrown around so far. But what work has the department carried out in terms of, I think, what's been called the second round effects, in terms of the benefits that the Treasury directly will get as a result of us cutting corporation tax, so whether it's VAT or income tax or whatever it is, in order so we can present the strongest possible case? Have DFP done any work on the potential yields that would result for the Treasury in regards to those second round effects?
Well, I suppose a couple of points to make. The Fresh Start Agreement, as part of that, it was set out that those second round effects would not be included in the kind of adjustments as made to the block grant. That's a position that we have from the outworking of that agreement. Obviously, we're very mindful of what's happening in Scotland in terms of how they're going to apply the no detriment principle. Yeah. And we watch that with interest to see what applications there may be for Northern Ireland. We'll advise on that. In terms of we haven't got specific estimates in terms of the increase in the tax yields that there will be. However, what I would say is that research by the University of Ulster has indicated that by 2034 that the economy would be 9% greater in size. So it would be reasonable to assume that if the economy is that much bigger, that there could be a comparable impact to some degree on some of the taxes that are particularly sensitive to changes in economic activity, such as income tax and VAT. So that's one point. Now, that is very much into the future in terms of when we will see those yields increase. That research from the University of Ulster, Ulster University, as you call them now, also shows that the benefits in terms of when the employment gains or when we start to see those are kind of back-ended. There's somewhere in years are taken for firms to adjust their investment decisions. So you would see that you don't see those benefits materialise till later in that sort of time frame. I would expect that you would see something similar in terms of the benefits. So we expect to see the other taxes yields increase significantly in initial years. There could actually be a dip in those other tax yields in initial years potentially as we pay the cost of corporation tax, but then have to wait for the benefits to start kicking in.
Okay, the department's response on the issue of deductions to the Northern Ireland Block grant arising from the devolution of corporation tax states that the provision will be made for, and I'm quoting, a very clear scrutiny and approval rule for the committee and the assembly. Do you have any more detail on what that would mean in practice?
Not at this point in time, but obviously it's something that we would, there's significant public expenditure implications of corporation tax devolution, and it would only be right and proper that as part of the budgeting process and as part of getting agreement to how we utilise these powers, that's presented to both the Assembly and the Committee.
Okay, that's fine. If I could finally then just move on to another issue, which is English votes for English laws, and obviously I'm not asking you to make any political comment in relation to that. But I think one of the issues I have with English votes for English laws is there are very few laws which are really just English laws, because as you know, in terms of health and education, other types of spending, it has a direct consequence on the other devolved regions. So following on from that, has the department made an assessment of the implications or potential risks to the Northern Ireland Block grant from English votes for English laws?
Not that I'm aware of in terms of specific assessment. Obviously, we would be mindful of the impact of any decisions which then impact on spending levels in GB, which will then, through the Barna formula, impact on the consequentials that we receive. Mm-hmm. But it's difficult we can't foresee at this point in time what that might mean in terms of voting patterns and how that translates into spending profiles.
Okay. Claire?
Yep, well, Martin touched on sort of how much more ambitious and how much more delivery the Scots do with their devolution, but just I'm aware that the previous minister met with the Scottish and Welsh counterparts in August, and I think they were looking at the spending review and the statement of funding policy. What were the outcomes of those meetings, and specifically about the infrastructure spending, Barnett consequentials of High Speed 2?
Okay. As you know, in the run-up to the spending review, there was some uncertainty around the outworkings of HS2 in particular, in terms of whether we would receive comparability through the Barnett formula. Thankfully, that has been resolved in the spending review, and we will be receiving Barnett consequentials and comparability in relation to HS2 allocations. More generally speaking, I mean, the Minister does routinely engage through trilateral meetings with his colleagues in Scotland and Wales on a range of issues, many of which are coming out of the spending review, for example, the apprenticeship levy, etc. And we'll continue to do that to ensure that we're getting the best outcome for Northern Ireland.
I was going to ask you where that's going, that relationship, and ensuring that we are, I suppose that we are stealing their ideas. Basically, I was trying to think of a better euphemism for that. But will that continue, or is the Minister and the Department actively looking at the added value that Scotland in particular are getting and planning to replicate it?
Yes, I mean, certainly there will be continued engagement with colleagues in Scotland and Wales, and we'll continue to closely assess developments in those regions to ensure if there's anything we can learn or anything we can work together on to ensure best mutual outcome for all.
Okay, I'm new to the committee, so what were the statement of funding policy? What were, I mean, that was obviously quite out of date. What were the changes, or the most significant changes to that?
To be honest, the changes were fairly minor. They were mainly presentational type changes. There were no substantive changes to the nature or basis upon which we receive funding. I mean, obviously there was an update in terms of the comparability factors, i.e. an assessment of how spending locally linked to spending in UK and how it compares. But other than that, there were no substantive changes to the Barnett formula.
That's all from me, Ryan.
In terms of some of the recent news articles around the face-off between Holyrood and the Treasury, you always get the impression that the officials and sort of the ministers are a lot more, the perception is they're a lot more bullshit, and with Treasury, and they well, certainly in terms of the optics of it, they appear to be meeting them head on. Is that something, an approach we should adopt as well? Or is that an approach we adopt? I mean, the officials go over to Treasury from Belfast and stick it up to them, or not? Because I think it's an important...
Well, I suppose one thing is to say, Charles, where we differ in terms of how we see the things should be treated. We robustly argue the case with Treasury officials. So, you know, I think I'd like to assure the committee that when we're dealing with Treasury, that we ensure that if we have good arguments to put forward, we certainly put them forward, and we put them forward strongly. And Minister, when he and I'm sure his predecessors meet with colleagues, do likewise.
Because I suppose the concern would be, I mean, with corporation tax being transferred, yes, we want more fiscal powers here to better the outcomes for the people who represent, but we need to ensure we get the right deal as well. And I get a sense, certainly, I mean, from what they're saying in Scotland, that they would walk away from the new powers that they confer, including income tax and VAT, if there's no acceptable deal on the fiscal framework. I suppose the concern here would be that, you know, we're rushing into corporation tax without dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Well,
I suppose, you know, the timing issue is important. You know, Scotland are further down the devolution path than us on this, but it's important to bear in mind that they've been talking about the powers that they were going to devolve for a significant period of time, where you're getting a lot of focus and a lot of negotiation now as they're getting, you know, to a very critical point. You know, when we're at that point and as we move towards that, I wouldn't expect to see any material difference. You know, we will be equally challenging, and when there's a final agreement to be done on how our mechanism will be applied to Northern Ireland, we will be equally as robust. But you know, the noise, I suppose, is the best way to describe it around this, around the Scottish debate, is increasing as they get quite close to a deal. And the timing issue is slightly different here, but we're not at that point yet, but we will get to it.
Any other questions, members? None? Okay. Folks, thank you very much again. Okay, members, can I refer you to pages 81 to 84 of your main packs? Morning.
Morning.
Emer, do you want to make an opening statement on this and then we'll go straight on to questions? That's
Thank you,
okay?
Chair. I just wanted to talk about the dormant accounts and the establishment of the Northern Ireland Community Finance Fund. The Dormant Accounts and Building Societies Accounts Act 2008 makes provisions for the use of monies from dormant accounts and building society accounts to be used for social or environmental purposes. Key principle of the scheme is that disbursements from the fund will be for purposes that are additional to and not a substitute for mainstream government spending. Therefore, these funds do not form part of public spending. Under the 2008 Dormant Accounts Act, banks and building societies can voluntarily transfer account balances that have been dormant for 15 years or more to a reclaim fund. The reclaim fund is a private body and managing private funds. It was authorised by the Financial Services Authority in March 2011. The transfer to the reclaim funds by banks and building societies is discretionary. The legal rights of persons entitled to dormant account funds are subsequently identified is preserved. The 2008 Dormant Account Act also provides that the Big Lottery Fund shall distribute dormant accounts monies for meeting expenditure that has a social or environmental purpose. It is the Reclaim Fund's responsibility to determine the amount to be transferred to the Big Lottery Fund. The money transferred to the Big Lottery Fund is then apportioned between England, Scotland and Wales, according to a formula agreed by Parliament. Government ministers in each of these countries has the power to give the Big Lottery Fund legally binding directions as regards to the use of the transferred funds. The Minister for Finance is responsible in Northern Ireland. At the present time, some 7.1 million is available for Northern Ireland expenditure. As advised at our last evidence session on this issue, the then Finance Minister, Simon Hamilton, had announced as part of Budget 2015-16 that the money should be made available in Northern Ireland under the heading of the Social Innovation Fund. The then Minister had also agreed that the purpose of the fund would be to support social investment in its broadest sense. At that time, I advised the committee that there would be further consultation before the Department would make provision restricting the purposes for which or the kinds of persons to which a distribution of dormant accounts money for meeting Northern Ireland expenditure would be made. In the intervening period, successive finance ministers have listened to calls from the community and voluntary sector and other stakeholders that the fund be established as soon as possible and in the most streamlined way. Indeed, this committee also asked the consideration be given to the scope that existed to streamline the transfer of dormant accounts money from bank and building societies to projects on the ground, bearing in mind the associated legislative requirements. In order, therefore, to expedite the establishment of the fund, the current Minister, Minister Storey, has decided not to restrict the purposes for which or the kinds of person to which a distribution of dormant accounts monies for meeting Northern Ireland expenditure may be made. This means that there is no longer a requirement to proceed under Section 21 of the Dormant Accounts and Building Societies Act and make a separate order exercisable by statutory rule and approved by resolution of the Assembly. Rather, the Minister has decided to act in accordance with Section 22 of the primary legislation and, after consultation with the Big Lottery, direct that organisation to develop a strategic plan for the utilisation of the fund in Northern Ireland. This strategic plan will be laid before the Assembly. Under the existing legislative framework, the Big Lottery, in collaboration with a third party, will be delivering the Community Finance Fund. This is a non-lottery funded programme. The Minister, as I've just mentioned, has also decided to rename the fund as the Community Finance Fund rather than the Social Innovation Fund, really to draw a distinction between this fund and other funds that may have a similar title. Through the creation of a Community Finance Fund, the Minister is of the view that the Northern Ireland Executive can improve the access to finance for a range of organisations across the third sector, including social enterprises, church groups and smaller community-based organisations, allowing those organisations to make further investments in their activities, grow their organisations and become self-sustaining. This investment will enable such organisations to increase their revenue and resources and increase the level of social benefits they deliver. It is expected that the fund will be operational by late 2016, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, it says that the firm's intention is that the fund will be distributed by a third party appointed by the Big Lottery. On what basis will the third party be selected, and what, if any, potential bodies have been identified so far?
It will be through a procurement process led by the Big Lottery. The department won't be taking that procurement process forward. It will be through the Big Lottery as directed under the legislation. At the moment, there are a number of providers in Northern Ireland that have expressed an interest throughout this process.
Yeah, the Ulster Community Investment Trust and Building Change Trust, Charity Bank, that sort of group have expressed interest.
And were any other options considered by the department, aside from running us through the Big Lottery?
Yes, this issue has been under active consideration since the primary legislation was enacted in 2008. It's been subject to 2 separate public consultations where the department considered restricting the use and the purposes for the fund. Both of those were inconclusive. And really, I suppose the fund now is sitting at £7.1 million. That money needs to be made available, and the Minister has taken the decision to act within the legislative framework as outlined in the framework and is proceeding on that basis.
When will the £7 million hit the ground?
Well, we now are working with the Big Lottery to develop the strategic plan, which will be laid before the Assembly. The procurement process will then have to take place, but it is hoped that the fund would be established by late 16.
Late 16?
Yes.
Jim?
So it was actually announced originally by the then Finance Minister Samuel Wilson.
Indeed, yes.
So why on earth, given the fact that that's way back in the dim and distant past, why has it taken so long to get to this stage?
It was because, I suppose, the legislation does allow Northern Ireland to restrict the use and the purposes of the fund, and in proceeding along that way, the consultation processes, etc., were inconclusive and agreement couldn't be reached. So we have taken it through many iterations, but we have now gone back to the actual legislation.
One of the reasons why it was introduced is that there are certain church groups in Northern Ireland who on principle will not touch lottery, but including my own church, the Presbyterian Church. Many churches won't touch it because it's deemed to be gambling. Why then, given the fact that other organisations, non-church organisations, have had access to vast amounts, I mean literally billions of pounds of lottery funding since the lottery was introduced, what, 20 years ago, why did you not decide to make the fund simply for those organisations who can't, because of their constitution, apply for lottery money?
This is not lottery money.
It's not, except it's not lottery
It
money.
is not lottery money, and it is not badged as lottery money. This is outside the Big Lottery funding.
Yes, but that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes, but to restrict the fund requires agreement, it requires resolution of the Assembly. To restrict the fund, you also need to be ensured that you're working within your fair employment treatment orders, that you're not, you're not discriminating against any other groups. The legislation as stands names the Big Lottery on the face of the legislation and allows that body to appoint a third party. So the funding is not Big Lottery funding, but in working this way, organisations can apply that do not agree.
Yes, but it could be argued that organisations like various churches are being discriminated against at the moment because they can't apply for lottery money because their constitution or their articles of association don't permit them to take the proceeds of gambling.
Yes, but this fund is open to such organisations. This is not lottery funding.
Yes. I have to be very careful here. I don't say you don't take prisoners, but try it from a different angle. I accept that it's not lottery money. I accept this is, though the other question is, and I have to ask this, where do you think this money is coming from? Why is there money sitting for 30 odd years in people's bank accounts that hasn't been claimed?
I suppose that it's a UK-wide policy, really.
I mean, could it be that some of this money is the proceeds of crime?
I wouldn't be aware of that detail, but
It just seems odd that there's £7.5 million. People have forgotten about £7.5 million.
We know you wouldn't forget about
Exactly. I wouldn't forget
that may not necessarily be in Northern Ireland. They've forgotten about 7.1. This is our share of the UK-wide total.
That's 3% of the overall total, presumably the Barnett
Vast
consequences.
sums, yes.
So it's a vast amount of money that people have forgotten about.
Or they've been left in unknown accounts when someone has passed away, or there is funding around.
But assuming that this money is all, just genuinely forgotten about, the point I'm making is that Christian organisations have been excluded for 20 years from the vast pot of money that's National Lottery. You're saying you can't ring fence this for organisations have been excluded because it requires primary legislation. Why can't we have primary legislation?
I'm not saying that. There is an ability under the Primary Act, which is the Dormant Bank and Building Society Accounts Act, for Northern Ireland to restrict this fund.
Right.
We have been trying since 2008 on a range of consultation options to bring it forward under that mechanism. We've been unable to get agreement. But at the moment, the community and voluntary sector and other bodies, there's money sitting here that's not being used in the current financial context and constraints that we're operating in. The money is not Big Lottery funding money, and it is coming through now, through this scheme, to be available for those groups to apply to.
But when you think about it, Emer, isn't it logical that those organisations who have already had access to over £1 billion worth of funding to the National Lottery will say, we want it wide open? And those organisations who have been excluded by their constitution from applying will say that they want it restricted. You're not going to get agreement because obviously the organisations who have done well already are going to look for their slice of the £7.5 million. So how could you get agreement on that issue?
Well, exactly, and then the funds will sit unused.
No, so shouldn't sit unused. What you should do is say that the first priority will be to those organisations who have been excluded from funding for 20 years.
We can consider looking at the monies and saying if you have not been in receipt of Big Lottery funding before, that gives you an eligibility to the fund. But we cannot, under this model that we're working for, we are not restricting the fund solely to one group.
Is it possible without even subordinate legislation to establish criteria that those organisations who have not received a single penny of lottery funding will get priority on an administrative basis for this funding?
Yes, we can look at that.
The
difficulty with that is it a named person or a named group, and ensuring, for example, if it is a congregation, that no one in the congregation has had access to the funding before. But we can look into it.
The Presbyterian Church in Ireland has never applied for a single penny of lottery funding. The Baptist Church have never applied, and many other churches.
Well, within the scheme that we're developing, we can give consideration to those groups that have not applied.
There's a wee bit of difference between give consideration and actually do something. Can you tell me, are you developing criteria at the moment which will give those organisations the first crack of the whip, as it were, in terms of accessing the £7.5 million?
If they can clearly demonstrate they haven't been in access of lottery funding before, it can be considered.
And is there anything that this committee can do? Is there any change in the regulations that could be implemented to make certain that that actually happens?
Well, we can reflect. The department will direct the Big Lottery to devise the scheme.
And do you think that will pass sort of normal equality criteria if you do that?
It should, yes.
Well, I think that's the best way forward. That can be done on an administrative basis rather than requiring a convoluted piece of subordinate legislation. That's great news, and that's really the point I'm trying to make. I'm thinking particularly of church roofs, listed buildings, and all the huge expense that churches face with it. And the majority of this is churches, our churches. So that's really good news. Now, when would we know the criteria that will be established for the disbursement of the £7.5 million?
Well, we're beginning to consult with the Big Lottery now, so we would expect directions to be available early on in the next mandate of the Assembly.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, and we slightly word, does it have to have the Big Lottery tag to it, in the sense that, as it's not Big Lottery money, why is the Big Lottery actually involved in any aspect of the disbursement of this money?
The Big Lottery is named in the primary legislation. The Reclaim Fund gives the money to the Big Lottery, so the Big Lottery is holding the funds as we sit now. And the Big Lottery in the legislation has a very clear role.
But it will be made very clear that it's a totally different pot of money. There will be no pollution of the money that were coming from what some people rightly or wrongly believe to be gambling.
Yes, but the Big Lottery is a very reputable organisation and it's delivering a range, so that language we couldn't say. But this is a separate fund. It is not
Yeah.
derived from big lottery funding.
Right, well, that's good news. Thank you, that's great.
Okay, Martin?
I'm not sure, Mr. Wells, that was good news. You know, you killed it to Lily, but I'm not sure that actually you got good news there or not. But
I think it did.
but we'll see as we go forward. I met Minister Hamilton, so it's been through a few finance ministers since it started out on this last year. I'm delighted to see that we're close. Late 2016, I think, in government language means 2017. But you know, we'll travel and hope and see where it goes. And we do now have an innovation fund, a change fund, an investment fund, and now a community fund. And I think it's good that faith-based groups can apply to the new fund. I think that's good. But I'm not in favour of discriminating in favour of those faith-based groups, and I admire all the wonderful work goes across the city from the Morningtons and the Trussell Trusts and the Skeanoses and so on. So it's open to them, but I don't think we'd get away with in 2016 or 2017 saying that they're the only people who can apply, or there would be advantageous conditions to them. But tell me a little bit about the fund, because I met Minister Hamilton because I didn't think it was ambitious enough, and it doesn't seem to me it is ambitious enough. If we take a 7 million, we loan it. Is that right? We're going to lend the money, yeah?
Well, there's also consideration given to a grant hybrid model for those smaller organisations that maybe aren't investment ready right away.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that they would get grant assistance in the first instance to get them up and running.
Let's say, do they have to pray hard to get that? No, how does that work? I mean, you give them £5,000 or something, or can't help them?
Initially, to get up and running, I suppose at the scale of these funds, it's envisaged these to be quite small loans initially.
I think that's good news.
You know, and it's for the smaller groups. It's for those groups that probably aren't in the mainstream funding systems. They aren't applying for large sums of money, and it's really to help them to get on their feet and to get self-sustaining, which is the ultimate goal. You know, we're trying to move away from the grant-based model, I suppose, to the loan model where communities can become self-sustaining.
Okay, I'm in favour of that, Chair, but just when you say small, what is small?
Well, anywhere in the range, I suppose, from 10k up to 100k.
Okay, 100k would be
I think.
large, I would have thought, but I mean, and 10k is interesting. I am actually very much in favour of that, Chair. That's getting right down to a micro level, but I suppose if these are going to community groups, they're almost like micro loans. I take it they have to go to community groups, they're not for individuals. Sorry, I forgot
They're for social investment, so we would envisage, you know, small groups, community groups coming forward, church groups, social enterprises that maybe are coming between different groups springing up.
Okay. The bit that's missing for me is a wonderful model in the States. Since Mr. Wells got something out of this discussion, I might get something as well. But the wonderful model in the States called Kiva, K-I-V-A, where they give loans in the developing world, but also in inner city America, North America, where to individuals, they're loans for entrepreneurs. And you know, you can borrow $1,000 if you're in El Salvador to repair a truck or buy a truck to get to the market to sell your goods or whatever, and then you pay that back over a period. And it is a very reputable and successful model, and it's usually done through faith-based organisations in those areas, in Palestine and in Kenya or whatever. But the bit that's missing in this is that it gives individuals an opportunity to say, I will lend the fund money. So if we had, for example, someone in Fitzroy Church who said, well, look, I like this idea of funding small groups, some of them faith-based groups, some of them social enterprises that aren't like the churches. But someone would say, we're going to top up your fund. So you have 7 million, but I'm going to put £1,000 in there. And you can use my money to make these small loans. And that's the bit that's missing for me. Those of goodwill, whether here or in other jurisdictions or around the world, who want to help build a community here, I think it's be a great opportunity for them to put some of their own money in. And that's the Kiva model. The Kiva model is you give them $1,000, they lend it, and you get it back, and then when you get it back, you lend it again. And is it possible to look at that? I failed, now I have to tell you that Minister Story, I failed when I asked him, could the investment fund, the NI investment fund, could pension funds or other bodies put money into that, and that isn't a goer. But I wonder with this, is there any opportunity for people of goodwill to say, okay, you have a community finance fund, we would like to put some money in that so you can lend it to these great groups that are doing great work, transforming society, building bridges, building community. And that for me would be something we could sell, as the word is, sell to other areas. And I mean, it's not unique to us. It happens all over the world. It happens in the States in particular with different funds. So, don't mind you. I know you committed to change everything for Mr. Wells. Why did you commit to change everything for me? But could somebody look at that? Maybe?
See, I can work with them between 8 and 80.
Yes, and I'm not saying you committed to anything at all. But I would like someone to look at that, please. Good. Thank you, Chair.
Jimmy, you want the question on Marianne?
I just want to come back, Emer, because I thought I was making good progress until Mr. Willier came in there. And you say that it's 3%, but actually, National Lottery, there's a higher percentage of money spent in National Lottery than the 3% in Northern Ireland than you would expect. The National Lottery has been particularly generous to Northern Ireland because of social need, which is great news for the community. So why should the same principle not apply with this fund, that it should be higher than the national average?
The fund for the dormant accounts was set under the Reclaim Fund legislation, and that is apportioned through a formula agreed in Westminster. So it's broadly akin to Barnett. Yeah. But this is not big lottery money.
No, so, but you understand the principle of the big lottery, which I think is very welcome, because, you know, mental illness, social exclusion, poverty is much higher in Northern Ireland than the rest of the United Kingdom. The National Lottery has actually put a higher level of funding than the Guardian consequentials into Northern Ireland. I think we'd all welcome that. I thought the same logic should have applied, but I understand what you're saying. Why, given the fact that the vast majority of National Lottery money is grant aid, why have you opted for in most cases, for a loan model?
It's really for the self-sustaining principle that communities are able to finance themselves moving forward, that they're able to grow. And through the loan model, it provides, I suppose, an opportunity to evergreen this fund as well for us. So when the loans are repaid, there's still a fund. You know, the dormant accounts money, as you've already alluded to, is quite self-limited. You know that we've got most of the dormant accounts money now into the Reclaim Fund. There'll be small additions year on year, but the big bang has happened. So you know, we could grant this fund out and it would be gone in 5 years, and that would be it. But by making it a loan model, there's an opportunity to increase its longevity.
But probably the typical model is going to be somewhere like Fitzroy Presbyterian wanting to replace its roof. It's difficult to see how you replace the roof, that's done, and the roof lasts for 100 years. It's difficult to see how that roof can be sustainable in the future. It's there. You know, it's that type of model I think you're going to get applications for.
Yes, but the loan will be repaid.
So then why wouldn't they just go to a bank and get the loan?
Because I suppose in this there's the wider support mechanism around the fund. There'll be, for smaller organisations that aren't used to making applications, there'll be support there for them in making the application. It's a way into financing that maybe other organisations are slightly afraid of or haven't accessed before. So it is a community focus and a community basis.
So it's not really an alternative for faith-based organisations who can't access the lottery. It's a very different model. It's a very different model to the National Lottery in that sense.
It's not a lottery. It's not lottery funding. It is a different model.
Yeah, yes, but it was originally, when Minister Wilson announced it was meant to provide an alternative to groups who couldn't apply for National Lottery. But it is a very different model altogether. Because National Lottery, the vast majority of it's grant aid. It's money given to charities to fix the roof or to run their community group or whatever. It's not loans. In fact, I'm not aware of National Lottery giving any loans to anybody.
And this is where the reliance on the third party will be important.
And was that established that we don't have the power to vary that at local level? It's a Westminster decision. The idea that it's loans rather than grants, that's Westminster made that decision.
No, we have the power in Northern Ireland. And this is where we're looking at loans and the grant loan hybrid model. For those organisations, smaller organisations that aren't maybe capable of taking the loan in the first instance, that they would get assistance through the grant aid in the first, but become self-sustaining in future as they needed, if they needed more access to finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Liza?
Yeah, I'm going to come at it really from the other end. There is reference here that the rights of the legal person entitled, you know, the actual owners of the accounts or descendants, that their rights will be preserved. How will that be actually carried out in effect?
This is managed centrally through the Reclaim Fund.
So where is centrally?
The Reclaim Fund is a private organisation, but anyone can apply back to that fund if they've evidence that they own the dormant accounts, and the Reclaim Fund will pay them back.
So they would apply to the lottery fund in essence?
No, the Reclaim Fund's a separate body from the lottery fund. The Reclaim Fund was established in order to be the repository of the dormant accounts monies that have been collected across the UK.
Because the banks wouldn't retain the records any longer, I guess, would they?
Well, I'm sure there are ways of people demonstrating that they own the money, and they retain that legal right to their money, and they may go and reclaim it from the reclaim fund.
Right.
Like the reclaim fund, keep a portion back, you know, so that if anybody does, you know, apply to it, then it's paid from that, and the rest of it then is distributed, you know, for the dormant
A
accounts.
portion of it, therefore, will be ring-fenced for
No,
repayment?
the amount, that 7.1 that's coming to Northern Ireland as Northern Ireland share is the portion that is being distributed. The reclaim fund is separately kept, you know, central funds to be able to allocate those out if anybody does apply and has a legal right to the funding.
So how much would be in that fund then?
The reclaim fund, I wouldn't be aware of that now. That
I'm
would
just
be-
thinking the scenario of people suddenly waking up because of all the attending publicity and find that, oh yes, what about that Martha's money?
That's 7 million.
And they go back and look for it and claim it out. Bearing in mind this is really dependent on an interest rate coming in, it's quite possible that the fund could be cleared out quite quickly.
That would be to the reclaim fund. The 7.1 million of the dormant account money that's coming to Northern Ireland would be separate, so it wouldn't impinge on the funding that we have to distribute.
Yeah, so you'd be
this
depending
mechanism.
on smaller parts of the UK really to fund the Northern Ireland people who suddenly resurrected. Is that right?
It's the reclaim fund.
It's a reclaim fund, yeah. That's what's left in the reclaim fund, and
Not a pro rata situation. It's not a pro rata situation. As
The reclaim fund's a
3%.
private organisation that was established to manage
Full
this
repayment.
issue.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Okay, members. Okay, thanks very much again.
All right.
Members, just before we move on to the next item, I think it would be appropriate to inform members that Bombardier announced they're going to cut up to 1,000 jobs from the north over the next, this year and next. So they said that 580 jobs will go this year, with 500 next. So it's not an issue for this committee, but certainly it's awful news for the manufacturing sector coming in the wake. Certainly of what's happening in my own area in terms of Ballymena, there's been a series of job losses there, so certainly a big challenge for the executive and the economy.
Incredible, but expected.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to subordinate legislation. Can advise members now consider 3 proposals for SL1s and 1 SR. Departmental officials are on hand should they be required to come to the table. The first one then, Public Services Pensions Revaluation Prices Order NI 2016, page 46 of tabled papers. Subject to affirmative resolution, members need to decide today whether they're content with the proposal at this stage or whether they require any further information. I can inform members that Brandon Smith from the department is in the public gallery to answer any questions that might arise. Do members have any questions for officials on this? Content. I'll put the question then. The committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation on the Public Services Pensions Revaluation Prices Order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed? Agreed. Public Service Pensions Revaluation Earnings Order NI 2016, page 50 of table papers, subject to negative resolution. Members need to decide whether they're content with the proposal at this stage. Any questions on this, members? The question, the committee has considered DFP's proposal for subordinate legislation on the Public Service Pensions Revaluation Earnings Order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed? Agreed. Rates ATM Designation of Rural Areas Order NI 2016. This is pages 88 to 90 of the main PAG. Subject to negative resolution. Conform members Andrew McAvoy is in the public gallery to answer any questions that might arise. Purpose of the SR is to designate new rural wards for the purposes of providing rates exemption for automatic telling machines in those areas. The new wards reflect changes to boundaries made as a result of the reorganisation of local government here. I might have a question on this one, actually, Andrew. If you... Right, go on.
Oh, it doesn't apply to the Lone Road.
Rural parts of South Belfast.
300 farmers.
You're kidding.
Castlereagh.
Is there many new wards covered by this?
Pardon?
Is there many new wards covered by this?
There's well, bulk of them are exactly the same as what they were.
Yeah.
In terms of the wards, we have 8 new ones coming in, and 3 wards coming out of the scheme. So net gain in terms of the amount of wards designated as rural. What we've tried to do essentially is just to match as closely as possible to the previous provision in the area, so that we could select the least number of ATMs that we're losing out. You know, NISR had done a bit of work with us on coming up with a definition. There's no centralised definition that we can use across government at the moment. So it's the definition that's been designed by us purely for the purposes of this particular scheme at the moment. So it's a relatively small scale scheme anyway, £150,000 worth of support per year, but we've tried to map it as closely to the previous model as we done previously.
Do you have any figures then, since this was introduced, how many ATMs have popped up in rural areas, and what has been the increase? What has been the effect
Since
of
the
this?
scheme has come into effect, the evaluation that was done by the department the last time on it was more or less saying that the scheme in itself, since it came in, there's been about 3 or 4 ATMs each year that have come on board in different areas, you know, but we don't necessarily think that's as a result of the scheme. What the evaluation found the last time was that while it might not necessarily incentivise banks and building societies to come into an area, what it will do is stop them from taking an ATM out of an area. So for that reason, the department's kept the scheme going. It's there to facilitate cash flow into rural areas by allowing people to access their cash, you know. But it is relatively limited in that it doesn't extend to the scheme itself doesn't extend to all ATMs. It's purely those that are valued as a separate site as an ATM. So if they're part of a bank or building society building, then they fall outside the of it. So.
Deputy Chair.
Yeah, no, mine was just, and I listened about, there are actually farmers out in Carryduff, and I know, I think it's a good scheme. And how do you decide what's designated as rural, and does it apply to the whole ward?
Yes, they look at the individual ward characteristics, and effectively just introduce my colleague Brian here. No, the definition that's being used by the Department of Rural in this case is where 80% of the residents or more are rural. Yeah. So that, and I say that definition matched up almost exactly with the coverage of the previous schemes.
So in theory, it could apply to, you know, a small town in a yeah, that's fine. Just curious. Yeah. Thank you. That's fine.
Okay, Jim.
Recently, we've lost 8 rural branches in South Down, and for instance, some of the size of Crossgar now, for instance, hasn't got a bank. Now, you may not define Crossgar as rural.
I just tell you it is.
It is. Well, but it's Refrieded.
In Newrymorn and Down, it's Annalong, Cumlock, Crossgar, Killylay, Drummondess, Dundrum, Lecale and Saintfield.
Right. Well, Refrieded had 3 branches and now it's down to 1.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're all, myself and John, are campaigning strongly to make certain that branch stays. But you could get quite a sizable town like that with no banking facility at all and a considerable distance to the next banking facility. And places like Warren Point, Kilkeel and Newcastle have also lost branches. And this is all going the one way, this traffic. You know, there's no doubt about it. So do you keep a constant updating of the situation to reflect the fact that banks are pulling out in rural areas?
Well, we do. For starters, we only ever extend the scheme one year at a time. So each year we look at to see how many ATMs there are, where they are. The other thing is, as a result of the rural needs bill that's been taken forward by DARD and the sort of work that they're doing on rural proofing,
that department is looking at the possibility of an interdepartmental group to set a standard definition across government that, you know, might extend the definition of rural. As I say, what we're trying to do at the moment is try to keep it as closely as possible to what existed before in the absence of that.
I think somewhere like Rathfriland, which is a very rural town, but the majority of the population of the ward live in the town, that if things became worse, and I think they will, sadly, that we will continue to lose rural branches, that there should be a protocol that will allow it to be defined as rural in the sense that the next nearest banking facility will be 10 or 11 miles away, and that, you know, causes huge problems to local people if there isn't an ATM in the town, and it is a town rather than a village.
Rathfriland excluded?
Rathfriland isn't included in the rural wards.
In the rural wards, yeah.
So I mean, I think you have to look at that as well as the fact as how rural the actual nature of the ward is. Because I think, I'd say, no, my knowledge of Rathfriland, I'd say 60% of the people in the Rathfriland ward live in a town, but it's still a very rural area.
Yes.
And I think it's only £150,000 we're talking about. That is very good investment in the rural community.
Across the board for the whole scale.
Yeah, for the entire Northern Ireland, I think that, you know, it's not a huge expenditure. And, you know, if you pull out the ATM out of the town, then you really have problems for the local community, because if an ATM at least enables them to withdraw money, order checkbooks, get statements, etc. So it's still an essential component. And if it encourages banks who pull out to at least leave the ATM, then that's a very good thing.
Content, members? Okay, all right, folks. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay. Apologies for being late. I was with the Minister on the Lisburn Road to do with the empty premises relief, so that's why I'm late. So sorry about that.
So we should
Our ears
let
have
us know. You should we would have been there instead of been here.
Thank you.
You've got your priorities.
Okay, members, content. I put the question the committee has considered DFP's proposal for supporting legislation under the rates automatic telling machines designation of rural areas order NI 2016 and has no objection to the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage. Agreed. General Register Office Fees Order NI 2016, pages 92 to 100 of the main pack. Subject to affirmative resolution at the meeting on 27th of January, the committee considered the initial proposal and were content. The Department has confirmed there's been no changes to overall policy since the initial proposals were submitted. Examiner has raised no points by way of technical scrutiny, so members are content with this one. But the question that the committee has considered SR General Register Office Fees Order NI 2016 and recommends it be affirmed by the Assembly. Agreed? Agreed?
Sure, yeah.
Correspondence.
Okay, Chair, I'll just pick out items of correspondence requiring committee decisions. Page 102 of the main pack. It's a departmental response to the issues raised by Eden Moor Golf Club. This is the issues that privately owned golf clubs were having in terms of enhanced rate relief for casks. So the department has responded to that correspondence just to seek committee's agreement to forward that to the Eden Moor Golf Club if members are content for information. Chair.
Yeah. Jim?
I know Mr Logan very well, and I also am very aware of the situation. What are known as proprietary-owned golf clubs are finding it incredibly difficult to compete with member-owned golf clubs or council-owned facilities because they have to charge VAT on their green fees and they have to pay full rates. And my understanding is there's about 8 of these clubs in Northern Ireland, all of which are struggling. And in fact, one in Armoy in your Grace Hill has already closed. So this is how dire the situation is. So in addition to sending the response back to Mr Logan, is there any possibility at some stage we could take on board the views of these particular niche of golf clubs which are owned by private individuals who were encouraged under farm diversification to go into this model and now find it's impossible to sustain themselves given the fact that membership-owned clubs can apply for lottery funding, for grant aid, and have a much lesser financial burden placed upon them by the virtue of the nature of what they are. And I'm just wondering at some stage, could we meet the representatives of these clubs so they can take us through how DFP putting them at a substantial disadvantage.
If the committee's content, we can write to, would this be an evidence session before the end of mandate? That
I think they're very keen to meet us. There is a sort of a group of them that could come to represent their needs, because the way things are going, these clubs are in such dire situation that they may not be sustainable.
Okay, members content?
Okay. Then the next item of correspondence, Chair, is the Department's response to issues raised in research papers in relation to the 16-17 draft budget, and this is for forwarding on to Assembly Research, if members are content. Then there's correspondence at page 145 of the main pack. It's in from Cerberus in response to evidence from Bell and Company accountants to the ETI committee. The Bell and Company also made its written submission to this committee, so it's really to seek committee agreement to publish that Cerberus response on the website, if in line with the previous approach, if members are content. Then at page 60 to 63 of the table pack, there's correspondence. It's in relation to an upcoming legislative consent motion that the OFM-DFM committee will be considering, Chair, in relation to the Northern Ireland Stormont Agreement and Implementation Bill, Plan Bill, and there is provision in that to change to the executive functions of the finance ministers in relation to the the Fresh Start Agreement. Provision to ensure that the Assembly cannot consider spending plans which exceed the block grant allocated by Treasury or the Executive's borrowing limit. So the OFM-DFM committee will be seeking a response to this from this committee, and they're very tight turnaround time for that. So if members are content to seek a view from the department in relation to this in terms of further explanation to inform this committee's response. That's all the correspondence requiring decisions, Chair.
Okay, forward work programme, page 150 of the pack. Members content that its update reflect decisions made today and published on the web.
Agreed.
Any other business?
Chair, I just wonder, in terms of Bombardier, I think we all feel a little bit powerless, and as the world of economics moves on, and a huge local employer takes a terrible blow. But I do note that in Quebec, where they saw this coming, and obviously they did this to protect jobs in Canada and Quebec, not to protect jobs in Belfast, I'm sure, but the provincial government in Quebec intervened and actually made an investment in the C-Series jet. And the last time I looked, the discussion in Canada was about will the government of Canada, the national government, do something? And I think, I don't want to get above our station, but I think we should find out, how did that happen, and what does that mean? Because there is no more important employer in the city of Belfast than Bombardier. You know, it takes a long, long time to bring in 500 jobs, 500 new jobs, and that's going to, I don't know if it's going to excite the rest of this year, and then there's more next year. So just for my contentment and nothing else, I'd like to find out how is it that the provincial government in Quebec made an intervention. I'm not suggesting we make any intervention. I think it would be ultra fires, I'm sure, but I think we should certainly make ourselves aware of how they use their finances in Quebec and in Canada to make an intervention.
I mean, Mr. Williams absolutely right as a Belfast representative to raise this. There's just one slight protocol. I think normally we would contact the DETI committee and ask them, is it okay that we do this? Because whilst obviously this committee is deeply concerned, it's a disastrous situation for the Belfast and Northern Ireland economy, but I think we can't actually do what Mr. Williams is asking unless we consult the DETI committee about it.
Any members, any views?
I mean, I agree with Martin's point. You're not just jobs, you're highly skilled jobs. Sort of jobs we want to be bringing in. I mean, if it's a matter of process of writing to the DETI committee, I don't see the
Okay, members content with that approach? Okay. Okay, I can advise members the committee will now move into closed session for the next agenda item in line with normal protocol Or considering draft committee reports?
30.